everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. My guest today is Raghavan Jagannathan, or as everybody knows him as Jaggi. Jaggi is currently the editorial director at Swarajya. He's also been, a previous editorial head at firstpost.com, Forbes India, Financial Express, Business Today. He's also an author of a book. If I remember the name of the book correctly, The Jobs Crisis in India. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Raghavan Jagannathan. Jaggi, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Kushal. It's a great pleasure for me to be on the podcast, and I admire your podcast. I must say, I do watch many of them. So, though at my own time, not in live format. So, I like them.
Yeah, so before I start, we get into the weeds. I have been a huge admirer of your work. It is very funny. You must have found my first DM to you very funny when you followed me on Twitter. The first thing I told you, good, you follow me now. I can
Yeah,
contact you.
yeah, yeah. No,
so,
actually,
so
I don't spend too much time on Twitter. I do spend 10-15 minutes a day to just to figure out what's going on, or I do retweet and all. I don't spend too much time on Twitter because I think for peace of mind and clarity, you need to stay away from excessive engagement there. Huh?
so just to lay it out, what is the why I called today's podcast an insider while remaining outside? It's only fair before I ask you this question. I think I laid down what I wanted to say. So, as someone who has been actively reading your work for such a long time now, I mean, I greatly admire your work, and I've always noticed this thing. Like, you were an insider, like you're in the mainstream media, you've spent so many years there, but you always also had that kind of an outsider perspective. So maybe I will first start by asking you this question: was I wrong in my assessment?
No, you're not wrong at all. I think I didn't put it that way, but I think now that you say it, I can see that that's exactly what happened with me. Because out of the 45 years that I have spent in the media, I would say 39 years were in the mainstream media. And out of that 39, I would say nearly 30 was in the business media. So business is mainstream in a slightly different way. That is, you focus on a narrow area where you do that. But like, I mean, I've been in business newspapers, editors there, and other things. So I always had my own sense of what I wanted to say. But as long as I was doing only business, I could not speak much about what I really felt about many things, except occasionally. I think it was in Business Standard and more later in DNA, where I decided I'll speak out on areas that are outside business. And that is where I think the feeling of outside thing must have come in, because there I started addressing political and social issues once in, say I should write a weekly column in Business Standard. Huh? So in the, say, three columns will be largely related to current business issues. One will be on certain broader issues. For example, I think even 10, 12 years back, people were a little surprised that I took on Amartya Sen and showed him out to be a phony. Huh? But the thing is, like, since it was one of those things, I think people could allow me to say, okay, you can always say one thing that's discordant compared to the thing. So it's only when I came to say, got out of print and into digital, let's say in First Post, then I could sort of start speaking on a wider array of things and not just business, because First Post was not just about business. And before that, I was in DNA, where I could write my columns, both business and other things. So it sort of, I think it made sense. And towards the end of my First Post tenure, when I think a corporate house took a stake in the thing, I decided that it might be a good time to move out, for the simple reason that sometimes you get branded. I mean, as that, oh, whatever you say. In fact, I had to take down one particular comment that I had made about Jetli and other things, because people got back to the corporate house and told them that, look, you guys must have used this guy to say something against us. So I took it down because it had nothing to do with them. And then that was when I realized that I should move out of a situation where a corporate house is seen as controlling what is being said in your publication. So regardless of whether they actually did something or not, they'll get blamed for it. If you wrote something positive, they'll say, "Ah, you've become a lackey." If you wrote something negative, they'll say, "Oh, they must have some axe to grind. That's why you wrote this." So in a sense, your whole opinion becomes devalued and tainted. So that is when I decided, thought it's a good idea to move to something that's very openly what it is, and there is no need to be an insider or an outsider in. But yeah, even today that format remains, because while I write and largely spend a lot of time with Swarajya, I write columns in Times of India and Business Standard, which are as mainstream as they get. So I do feel the need to do that, because I think I don't want to preach to the converted. I want to also talk to the people who uh, may not be convinced of some of my stand, but I think it's, if it can be put in a rational and logical way, they might see some point in it. That's why I'm still inside out, outside in. It's all there.
So Jaggi, let's unpack this a little bit. I find this bit very interesting, which you said you created a distinction between the print journalistic world and the digital journalistic world. Why do you think is the difference existing? Because if I was to say the orthodoxy when it comes to the print world, so is the orthodoxy in the print world far more left leaning than say the digital world?
No, it's not so much that. In mainstream media, there are certain boundaries. It's not about left and right, is a very sort of, I would say, narrow way of describing, because even in the mainstream media, in the economic sphere, there is a lot of right wing writing, right? People who are pro markets and pro business and all those things used to happen. So, in all the pink dailies, are hardly call them left wing, right? But in the mainstream paper, they're a little more mixed, economy oriented, and a little more, let's say, left liberal oriented in terms of their orientation. So I think the difference in the mainstream media between the pink papers, or rather the business papers, and the mainstream thing is, mainstream were more centrist. The business papers are obviously economically right, but socially they were no different from the thing. So that is how, at least I would categorize them. And in digital, the what really happens is you can break certain boundaries, because of the fact that you don't need to first of all retain a certain word count, where you have to be very tightly packed in some 750 words or 800 words. So you have to say things in a very small way. In digital, you can expand on a concept, on an idea much more. So it opens out. And I found that it was less of claustrophobic being in digital, because it sort of allows you to speak your mind without constraints, without feeling that somebody is looking over your shoulder.
So at an editorial level, so what do you think in terms of content creation or content curation? I guess would be the right word as an editor. Uh, what would be the differences be, let's say, in a print or a digital version?
Well, in print, I think because the pressure from the establishment is much stronger, meaning in the sense that, let's say, politicians or even judiciary or whatever it is, tends to be far more, what do you call, responsive, and keep noting what happens in print, but not so much in digital. So like, in print, whatever is said, I think people take it far more seriously, and for that reason the pressure from the establishment is much stronger there. Meaning, not, and when I say establishment, I don't only mean the party in power. The establishment is more than just the party in power. There can be multiple parties at the state level who are not the parties in power at the center. Then there is the judiciary itself, which is also establishment in its own way, because the judiciary thinks it can do anything in this country. So I have certainly taken on the judiciary repeatedly, but I've done it more in the digital space and less in the print space. But certainly I have taken them on in the print space as well. Hmm. But as I said, establishment pressures are much stronger in print.
That's very interesting, because I actually would agree, because I read you very regularly now on Swarajya. In fact, I mean, I try not to miss anything you write, and and I actually, if now that you've said it, I can immediately mentally recall that you are, writing more about the judiciary now. but that's fascinating. So why would the judiciary not? So does the judiciary not care about the digital space in that sense?
No, I think their problem is like as long as you're not abusing them or telling that speaking about biases. I mean, they can't really go after you for criticizing them. They can only go after you if you call them names or something like that. So as long as you say that constitutionally I am criticizing you because of the stand you have taken in a particular judgment or what you have said in court needlessly, so I do take them on. So for that reason, I don't think they can do much about it. But you never know because, like, but their judiciary is far more careful about two other areas. General things that happen in social media and in TV, they are far more concerned about it because TV is highly influential, and so is social media. So the print, they know, largely will stay within boundaries. When it comes to TV and all kinds of people may say all kinds of things, and same thing happens in social media. So they are scared more of social media rather than digital media per se. So in digital, I think that's what I feel. That's my sense of what the judiciary thinks.
That's very interesting. So now I wanted to touch upon, it was good. You when you said you joined Swarajya, you were very honest to say, I clearly know where Swarajya lies. Everybody
Hmm.
knows where I lie if I'm part of Swarajya, and it's very explicit that okay,
Yeah.
we come from this point of view, this worldview. These are our social and political and economic leanings. We are very open about it. But here's the catch. I have never understood this. In fact, I've spoken about it. Rahul Roshan has spoken about it. Many people have. So I wanted to, and in fact, I asked this question to Shekhar Gupta too: that can a journalist be neutral? And for transparency, I'll tell you what he said. He said, no, a journalist cannot be neutral. How can a human being be neutral? So, but why do you think this whole shtick of neutrality is always bandied about? And it's almost as if somebody from the mainstream always comes and tells us, and it, I don't know, sometimes I feel they infantilize the reader or something of that sort. I find it very offensive when the media comes and says, listen to me, I am your uncle, I am your dada dadi, I am your elder, I am very neutral, now you shut up and listen to me. Why do you think this attitude has been cultivated there?
I think they are scared of the fact that the narrative has started moving in multiple directions now because a lot of people have found their voices, not just on social media, but digital media and to some extent even in print and television. Some television stations, for example, are getting bolder and taking up questions that earlier they would never have. So I think they realize that. So this whole nonsense about neutrality comes in because they want to say delegitimize other points of view. So like when a New York Times does the same thing, they say that, look, we are neutral, all the other fellows are all wrong and things like that, huh? So uh, things like that happen. So I think they wear this cloak of neutrality in order to try and delegitimize others who they say, oh, you're very partisan. They don't realize that they are only partisan to some they are equally partisan, and they don't want to pretend that they are not. And so what they do is they have a very simple technique, that is, for every 10 things you write in, say, one particular direction, they will bring in one opposite view to say that, see, but I have also things, so I am neutral because I've got one article called out by things. This happens in TV frequently, actually. They will bring some very cogent fellow from the left liberal side, and then they will get somebody to rant about Hindutva, let's say. Huh? Okay, so so obviously the Hindutva guy would have talked some nonsense. Somewhere he would have shouted about something, and then automatically he gets discredited. Whereas the other guy will smile indulgently and say, "Look, we told you so. These fellows are like that." So this thing is a very good technique that they adopt. So this business of neutrality, but I think people have learned to see through them. I think, but I won't say that it's entirely so, but by and large, people are seeing it. The very fact that they're losing traction and they need to thump their chest saying they're neutral suggests that people don't think so. And why would you need to
But
say you're neutral if people thought you were?
yeah, and what about the condescension? Where does that come from? This sense of entitlement.
No, I think, see, I think we always, the sense of entitlement come from a very simple thing. For a long time, media has been part of the establishment. I mean, now they talk about speaking truth to power and all that, but they never really spoke truth to power whenever there was a different power in place, you know. So what they actually did was to sort of um, use an establishment view, whether political or whatever, and then just make some minor riders and all to what is being said in order to claim that they are neutral. But basically, the establishment could easily manipulate the media, and it was not very difficult. In fact, where you got objectivity, if you really want objectivity, it's up to the reader. That is, you must read, say, Swarajya. You should also read a publication that is quite different from Swarajya, which may give a completely different point of view. Then you will get neutrality. So somewhere between these two poles, maybe some truth is there. I mean, I'm not saying we supply any falsehood, but we have a perspective. Now, you don't have to accept that perspective as valid. You, if you really want the truth, you should read 3 or 4 publications which say different things. Then you will get a closer approximation of the truth. You know, it's the blind man and the elephant issue.
Yeah. So this is now. So you also mentioned not just media inside India, media outside India, but before that. Now I know you may not even agree to it, or you may want to avoid it, and if you do, it's okay. I don't care. But I have to talk about it. So was there two phases in your career, or were there two phases in your career, and have you seen the hostility towards you rise post Swarajya?
No, yeah, there are 2 phases. The phases are, of course, till around 2010. I would say I was largely in mainstream. After that, I moved to mainstream, but in the digital space, which is in first post and money control and that kind of things. And after that, I've been entirely in Swarajya since 2015, right? So certainly the second phase, I would say, started in mainstream and ended in Swarajya. But that, but in after 2010, I find that people were open and they believed that I have crossed over to some side that they would not approve of, and that they started calling me Sangi, this, that, all kinds of things. So then the labeling started, you know. So definitely there was a shift in the way people want. I mean, earlier they used to think that occasionally when I said something that didn't like, they said, okay, he's allowed to say something, 5% that doesn't disagree with us or whatever. But the rest of it, by and large, he conforms. I mean, and sticks to his business stories, so that where you're allowed to say most things, but in political and social space you're not allowed to say most things. And that is where I think the branding and relabeling started. So yeah, I mean, just I think just like Rahul Roshan must have said, you know, how a Sangi who never went to a shaka kind of guy. So you all begin saying that we all want to be fair to all parties and all that, but somewhere along the line, the branding itself brings you down. And even if you say something different, like I mean, now you get accused by both sides, so it's fine, which is all right, because people will think, what is this? You have started criticizing these Haridwar fellows who are shouting some nonsense, and then what happens? I think, well, have you shifted to the the left liberal caucus? No, it's not. I mean, you have a legitimate case, but you have to make it legitimately. You cannot just start some rant and expect me to back it. You know? So that is there. So that's okay. But by and large, people now realize that there has to be nuance in what you're saying, whom you're criticizing, and for what reason. But the relabeling has unfortunately gone through, and there is, in fact, today I would say that most mainstream guys, especially in TV, do not want to call me at all. But that's, of course, before I started refusing all of them. But I mean, because I mean, even those who are friendly to me, I really didn't want to be part of a guest list of 10 where you get to see 30 seconds of what you said, and that too mangled out of shape. So I think you do that. But say people like, say, an NDTV or those kind of plays, they don't really call, and if they call you, they've already determined which direction they're going to ask your question, so that they stay safe from the areas where they know you have a cogent argument. So they will basically, for example, focus on my book, which talks about the job issue, where they know that I have to be critical both of the government and of policies, because jobs is not something that I can say you've done fantastic job or anybody else has done that. Huh? So they will stick to safe areas where they know that by and large I have to criticize whom they want to criticize. I mean, this happened, if we actually notice, even with Arun Shourie. As long as he was seen as having written books that went against certain this thing. Huh? So uh, yeah,
So
so that's what happened. So this, for example, Arun Shourie was considered a Sanghi before before the Modi government came to power, and they wouldn't touch him with a barge pole, except in Indian Express where he was the editor. They couldn't refuse him. But once he got left out of the Modi government and he started being critical, every anti-Modi sort of TV channel used to have him regularly on these shows. I mean, so this is what happens. So they don't call you for your real views. They want to call you only if your views are likely to be meeting their political angles.
I actually have, and it's just something that has popped up as I was listening to you. So let's say about, I'm not even saying Swarajya in general, maybe Swarajya print, etc., etc. Why shouldn't Swarajya also be not considered now? I mean, full disclosure, I am a subscriber of Swarajya, not just now. For a while now, I've been a
Right.
subscriber for a long time,
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
and I don't think so. It's a crime. I think everybody should subscribe to Swarajya. By the way, please go and subscribe. But why should Swarajya then also be now considered as a part of something like a digital mainstream now?
Why should, sorry, repeat that
Why
question?
shouldn't Swarajya also
No.
be considered to be a part of the digital mainstream now?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. See, if you actually look at it, digital has become mainstream. If you look at most of the, even the so-called mainstream newspapers, they have now almost as much content coming on their digital websites. Though still, they still think a print guy still thinks print first and then digital, but they are gradually changing. I think only New York Times made the very sharp shift to digital very fast, but most other print publications still have a print first mindset, which is changing very slowly. But that change is happening. And as you know, even in the case of say NDTV and all, their big subscribers are all in digital, meaning they are the same true even for anybody else. So I would suspect that digital is indeed mainstream. It's just that in terms of the opinion makers, they still have a partiality towards print because it's a physical product. In fact, they don't even have a partiality towards TV, though there is some visibility there because people do like their mug shots somewhere. So TV they do go, but in terms of respect, they still think print is the ultimate. So in fact, one of the things that helps us is because we have a print product which contains barely 5% of our editorial output. People think we are more legitimate. Some people, I mean, not all. The people who want to read us anywhere, but the people, say in the mainstream, in the establishment, in thing, they think that we are valid because you are in print.
So that is very interesting. So I guess it's just if I was to assess this, it's more like a old habit, and the establishment on average has I don't know how to put it, elderly people have certain elderly people habits, because the elites basically control. I mean, whether we like it or not, the Pareto principle really is true.
Yeah,
It is the
that's right.
80-20
Yeah,
rule, and
that's right.
society follows the Pareto principle. People who are in the elite class still follow the print medium. So because the print medium exists, so it's literally come down to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And I think the power is still in the small group, which is in a different age group. It's all changing right now. But I think in probably another 15, 20 years, the change over to digital as mainstream will, in terms of attitudes, will there, because as the millennials come into positions of power through startups and they'll become billionaires in their own right, they will not see print as something like a god to be worshipped. So print will start disappearing from their thing. If I, in fact, I can see that shift happening already. My daughters hardly ever read a newspaper. I mean, mostly they get all their news in digital, and by the time they come into their 40s and 50s, the transition from one generation to another in terms of the power structure would have changed. I mean, Mukesh Ambani might still be reading a newspaper, but by the time Akash and Isha and others come into the power structure, the whole thing would have changed. So my guess is even in business that would change, and they will realize that the power of digital is far, far higher, for the simple reason that it is not constrained by space or delivery limitations. Today, why do people buy newspapers? The reason is not because of its authenticity, because it is the only physical product that comes right into your house without you making an effort. If tomorrow you had to go outside somewhere to a shop to buy a paper, how many people will buy newspapers is the question, which is why it is very vital for these print guys to deliver it to your home. The minute home delivery stops, so they start charging the full price for home delivery, then you will suddenly find that the print circulation start dipping dramatically, which is what happened abroad mostly. Because if you see the price of Financial Times, they're all costing £1 and £2. Can you imagine $150 for a paper? So and for a paper that is thinner than most Economic Times or something like that, right? They are basically very thin. Now, if you are paying that kind of price for delivery and for the newsprint costs and other things, nobody will pick it up. It's only because it's delivered at home at a very high cost to the publisher that people still are using print and as the god of the physical world.
Yeah. So it's very interesting because in our own house now I see a slight change in habits with my parents. I mean, they still
Yeah,
read the printed paper. We had stopped in
yeah,
between. My father basically has started it again because he still likes the feel of the newspaper, I guess. But it's very interesting when I see it in my own mom. My mom actually now regularly reads Swarajya, print, even Op India. So my mom has
yeah,
kind of, done that shift. I mean, so it's a very funny thing, she's on Facebook. So she's on Facebook to look at the photos of her friends, and then
yeah,
suddenly Swarajya and Op India and all these things pop up, and then she starts reading them. She'll
yeah,
click the link of the pages. So it's not like it's not changing, but yes, I still see the resistance. Like in my case, I'll be very open. I don't even read a printed book, and if I would prefer a Kindle copy in that too. Like a lot of times, I even when I review books from authors, they'll be like, I will send you a signed copy. I was like, my friend send me a soft copy. I don't want a signed copy. Because my house,
yeah,
and it's not out of disrespect to anyone. I just, because I read so much, if I started keeping
yeah,
books, my whole house will be only books, and where will I sleep? It will come
yeah, yeah,
in that kind of situation. But now I want to pivot to another section of the media, and this is where I also wanted to know, so what is your opinion now of this, the international media? Like Kanchanda had come a few days ago. Kanchanda wrote that piece in Swarajya against Bloomberg, right?
yeah.
Challenging the Bloomberg narrative. Jaggi, you've been here now for such a long time in this business or in this industry. What the hell has happened to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journals, to the Bloomberg? How can they see? I don't know how else to put it. How can they be so blatantly wrong and in many cases lying?
Yeah, actually, two things. As I said, in all, if you forget the fringe media in most countries, the mainstream media has always been in bed with the establishment, right? So there is a deep connection to both the deep state and the powerful money interests in all these things. Bloomberg is, at the end of the day, ultimately a byproduct of a business that puts a box in traders' rooms, right? Same thing with New York Times. If you read, there is a book on the New York Times which says that the New York Times has always been pro-establishment on the wrong side of history. From backing the Nazis to everything, they've always, and the George Bush's WMD campaign in Iraq, they've always been on the side of the establishment when it comes to that. So, in that sense, it is not surprising because the US deep state does see uh, that the need to quiet, even though they themselves are battling all the evangelicals and others at home, but abroad there is a huge congruence of interest in supporting them covertly by saying, "Oh, freedom of religion is being stamped out here, there." Though they are themselves in the US, they are at daggers drawn. They don't want these churches and all to have that kind of influence on their society, but they are happy to let them go and look for greener pastures. And so there is a congruence between the deep state and these various organizations that operate on the social and religious side. So I think it works for them. And also, these organizations are useful for them to gather data about us. Because when you are deeply enmeshed into Indian society, it serves, they are able to give you the a closer look at where the fault lines lie with us, and they keep driving the wedge in so that your fault lines actually deepen, and they allow you to not just manage your narratives but also to manage your sense of defiance of their positions when it suits them. It's only now in the last 5-10 years when they realize that India just can't be pushed around. And it's not just because of Modi. You become a $3 trillion economy. In another 5 years, you will be 5 to 7 trillion, right? So at that kind of scale, you cannot really say that you can't buy S-400 missiles from Russia, or that you cannot have a separate deal with Iran. So those things have started changing. But all the more reason why they feel it's necessary to drive the wedge in our own fault lines, so that they maintain some degree of leverage here. So these fellows all play the same game of the deep state and the other softer side of the.
Like, I just want to take this latest thing that has happened on social media. I don't know if you've read the comments of some South Asian experts on the whole
Uh,
Netaji statue thing. I mean, just, you know, how to, they're like, oh, Netaji is a fascist. Okay, what's the evidence? Oh, who are you to say? I'm the expert. You're not supposed to ask evidence from me.
yeah,
You're supposed to trust what I'm saying. I'm the
yeah,
trusted source. um you tell them about, oh, but Churchill and the Bengal famine and, millions of Indians dying. No, but Churchill was not a racist. He was an imperialist. Netaji was a fascist. Where do you think we have messed up then? I don't see this kind of freedom being taken in the China Studies department. I don't see this kind of freedom being taken in any other country, any other culture other than India, and I'll be very open, Hindu basically
yeah,
culture. They
yeah,
don't
yeah,
take
yeah.
such freedoms with Islam. They will not. They know
They
the
will not.
pushback, like the Council for North America in of Muslims in North America, or whatever organizations there are there. They will push back. But there has been a pivot now with the Jews also, that they're very anti-Jew now. I don't know why,
Yeah,
but it has changed. Very anti-Israel, very anti-Jewish. And with Hindus, it's as if they don't even count us. So my
yeah.
question to you is, I've always felt that whether it's the left or the right, the underlying uniting factor over there is the anti-pagan bias. It's nothing to do
Hmm.
with India. They're just
Yeah,
anti-pagan, and they think the
yeah,
only good pagan is a dead pagan. So do you
yeah.
think it has something to do, or do you think it's something more, or I'm totally wrong on this?
No, no. It that is the basis. You see, the original assumption that we have the truth and the rest have only false ideas is central to the Abrahamic religions. Not so much Judaism started the process, but did not carry it to its logical end, because Jews only saw themselves as having their special God who gave them a special place in their thing. Whereas Christianity and all made it their business to make other people they're part of their own labeling and business. I mean, Judaism they never sought to influence others. It only sort of kept to itself and said ours is a special God and we get the promised land, right? It's a direct connection between the God and us. But when Christianity and Islam came, their religion was not about talking to their own faithful. It became about how to impose our ideas on others. So, if you read Bill Warner's books on Islam, so it actually
Yeah.
applies as much to Christianity. Basically, he says, see, both these things, both these faiths did not quite succeed as long as they were just faiths and religions who were concerned with their own flock. But what they did was they made a changeover to politics in order to grab. Once religion aligned with politics in these two faiths, then they become all powerful. I mean, Christianity did it first by at the time of Constantine and others. The emperor and the faith made a pact to back each other up. And though they like the myth of being persecuted and all, but in the entire history of pre-Christian era, I mean, in the before Christianity became a major faith, barely 10 years were they actually persecuted during the time of Diocletian. You know, the others are all myths. The myth of persecution is what they, but it helped their politics, so it helped. So they do that. Same in with Islam. So there has been absolutely no pretense that politics and thing are anyway misaligned. You know, Christianity at least makes a pretense saying that the secular versus the temporal. But in Islam, there is no pretense whatsoever. They believe it's all the same, and so they have a right to decide what is this thing. So these and both have been against pagans, and with every newer version of the Abrahamic faith, it is becoming more extreme because that is what is happening. So anyway, I think that is the fundamental thing. The problem with Hindus is that we grew organically on this soil, and we grew with diversity and an acceptance of diversity. So for us, trying to unite on even common interests becomes very difficult because we have not yet found a way to organize ourselves, not just because of caste, but also because of the fact that even leaving caste outside, assuming we have managed to get rid of most of the evils of caste, or rather Varna Jati, as they say, you have not yet figured out how to fight for your common interests. And this has happened because we have had what S.N. Balagangadhara says. We had faced two kinds of colonization, where one is the Islamic colonization, which was a religious colonization, and then was a British colonialism, which sort of impacted us and made us think that we have somehow got it all wrong. So we have been denied our own sense of what we are about, and we try to think in the language and the mindset of the colonial power. You know, so this is why I think we are not able to get our act together. We are not able to think strategically on how to defend your common interests without necessarily getting angry about others. You know, this is what happens when you have this Hardwar conference. I mean, I can understand where they're coming from, but they are acting out of fear and shouting and screaming about some violence which they will never be able to ever bring into. They will never be able to get ordinary people to follow them. You know, forget about this thing. Whereas some people manage to get their violence acts done through socially. I mean, you can get a Kamlesh Tiwari killed without any state intervention, right? So that does not, it is a good thing that Hindus don't think in those terms. But I think the ability to get our act together is not very strong. I mean, and we still have not found a way to work together on defending common interests. That is where, and our minds are still colonized. Getting out of that colonial mindset is taking a lot. It's only now it's starting. I mean, if you saw Sai Deepak's book or Meenakshi Jain's books and all that, they are realizing that there is a different way of experiencing our past and the present, which does not have to do with colonial interventions. And I think this process will take a generation. So till that time, we will be looking at ourselves through a colonial lens.
But isn't it also an exaggeration at times? See, I'm very open about my criticism of JSD's
Yeah,
book. Nothing personal
yeah,
against him. I've always
yeah,
been very open. I am a critic of decoloniality. But I want to talk
yeah,
about something else now. I want to stick to the media landscape here. That
yeah,
so, and I have to play devil's advocate because it's only fair I ask you that question, because here
yeah,
at least I don't come from a place of malice. Um,
yeah,
what if I was to ask you then? Well, the Modi government now is in power for 7.5 years. So would you be an insider or an outsider? I mean, I don't know. Do you see where I'm trying to come from?
yeah, yeah. No, again, it's both, because one thing is I do have some sympathy for this government, and I do praise it where I think it's worth praising it. But I also believe I have to be a critic, because many things they do I do not agree with, both on the economic side and on the political side and on the social side. Right? I don't believe that they are doing the right things, or they could have done much more than with the power they have. So in that sense, I am both inside and means I have no animus towards them. I don't have an axe to grind and say that they are always wrong. I can praise them, and I can criticize them, and I hope they see it that way, because they do get upset if I criticize them. But while they're happy to accept the praise, but I think I think a genuine person has to be both inside and outside, because if you can't criticize your own side, then what is the point of being a friend? If a friend can't tell you the truth, who do you expect the enemy to tell you the truth? Because you are a well-wisher and you want somebody to succeed. And if you can't point out their faults and say, look, buddy, you got to change here. This is what you're doing wrong. Then you have to be exactly what you say, a devil's advocate with your own angel, so to say.
Yeah. And it is actually such a tragedy in India that I was thinking about this, that because the opposition is so discredited in the eyes of the average public in India, it's like, um, I always say this, and I mean, I got no issues. Rahul Gandhi has damaged the credibility of opposition politics in India single handedly by his shenanigans. And I say
Yeah.
this with full responsibility as a concerned citizen of India. These are my views. I'm not attributing them to Jaggi at all, but these are my views. But the point is that in such a situation, who's going to, I think I see myself criticizing the BJP most of the time. I'm like, we
Yeah.
have to do it because we love our country, right? We love this
Yeah.
country, we want our country to progress. So what if my natural question to you, so how do you think this government has been in the last 7.5 years, if you were to look at an outsider view, just as a citizen, as a person in the media, what do you think this government has been doing?
So I think in certain areas of, see what I mean, I'm trying to understand what they were trying to do. One was the politically the BJP was trying to move more to the center left position, because any party that wants to rule India needs to take the masses along. So I think that is what they've been trying to do, and so one has been clear that, see, you can't be a complete economic right wing party and expect to be at the getting 37% of the votes, right? The I mean, the elite constitute only 1 or 2%. So you have to be in that sense. So politically, what they've done is right, but I think the damage they have done is more in terms of the speed with which they tried to push many changes, which especially this obsession with corruption, black money, and all that. That has been a huge damage, because uh, these things have to be done over 10, 15 years. You cannot try and abolish corruption in 1 year or 2 years. The reason why the telecom industry is in such thing is because compared to the UPA corruption, you wanted to show that you are totally uncorrupt, but you made the industry so unviable that there are only three guys left, and out of that, one guy is tottering. Right? So, and ultimately, you had to do what you should not have done in the made it such an expensive business in the first place. Similarly, when you are going after black money, you are effectively going to damage a part of the economy, because in the real economy, there is no difference between black money and white money. It doesn't come with a different color, right? So, black money used to boost consumption demand because a lot of it was floating around. So, a lot of people could buy things which used to come through the black route. Suppose I have a lot of black money as a politician, I will give it to my constituents and friends to spend. That will come back as demand for my product for business. But when you clamp down on black money too hard too soon, it will inevitably result in a slowdown, because a 20 to 30% part of your economy has suddenly disappeared from the consumption and demand side. So I think that is where they went wrong. But most other things, I think they would have broadly right. And also, I think they took a very long time to figure out what was wrong with banks. I mean, you should have known that in 2014, people like the chief economic, the PM's economic advisor like Vivek Devroy, they all knew it. And they could have easily told him in one day that first thing you have to do is fix banks. But banks started getting fixed only after 2017. So again, you went into a double balance sheet problem where banks were not lending, corporates were in deep shit because of high debts. So you had people deleveraging. When you're deleveraging, there can be no investment demand. Consumption demand died because you were stamping out corruption. So, and if you expect that the economy will not slow down when both investment and consumption are going down, that was a fundamental economic mistake. So, certain things have to be done slowly. They can't be done all of a sudden. So, economically, that's where. Politically, I would say there are many things they could have done to, for example, help generate the right kind of equal rights for Hindus and other things. Whether through, I mean, making it clear that Articles 25 to 30 are not meant only for the protection of minorities, that state cannot run temples. All these things are areas in which they could have started some process, but they have been, or for that matter, rewriting history to give it greater balance. Nobody says that the left view of history is wrong or totally wrong. All you are saying is that that is one way of looking at history, but there are other ways of looking at history, and it is, you will get a proper balance in history only when another side of history is also written about, and when you mix the two, you will get better history. But they didn't even begin the process, and they put guys who had no clue on history to run the Indian Council of Historical Research and others, and sort of defamed themselves. So that's where they could have done more. All these things needed to be done, but they didn't have the gumption to take the bull by the horns and do it correctly. I think they were too, if I may use a word from Islam, they were too dhimmified into seeking pats on the back from people who dislike them. That is, whether it is the guys outside or your own secular group or whatever it is. They were seeking a bad pat on the back from these guys who were anyway were keen to see them out. So when you're going to seek the approbation from the enemy, you will end up shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I agree with you that that has been a unfortunate trait in the government. But do you think in a country as complex as India, and in a country where you've had a single party and an ideology, more than that, an ideology, even when the Congress was not in power before the BJP option came, whatever used to come was pretty much Congress 2.0,
Yeah.
in multiple ways, and even the behavioral patterns in the bureaucracy and many other places of Indian society. In a situation like that, do you think uh, it's that wouldn't that it be so hard to change such an entrenched system?
Yeah, in fact, that is where I think I have some empathy for what the government is trying to do. So you have to do certain things, change the system, little tweak a little at a time, so that over a period of time, the complexion of our polity and our bureaucracy and all start changing. So it takes a long time, and I think one of the things where I would, in fact, like to applaud the government is they have taken a long term view. But politics, unfortunately, you can't take that long term view. You have your 5 years, or maybe you're lucky you have 10 years. Now, in 2024, if unless you are expecting to win again, you have 2 years to do whatever you want to set off in motion right now, right? So after 24, if you're not in power, a lot of things you did might be rolled back if a different set or a wrong set of combination of political parties come to power and their priorities are something quite different, right? So I think in politics, unfortunately, it's very difficult to take a long term view on what needs to be done. I agree that what needs to be done is a generational project and not a 5 year political tenure project. But you have to begin some of the processes in the right way. I mean, a simple thing like, say, Hindu Muslim issues are there in this country, whether you like it or not. Now, what stopped you from setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission right on the day you were inaugurated in 2014? Right? The idea is not to demonize one community or the other, but to say
Yeah.
that, look, these things happened in history. We have to acknowledge them and move on, and we can negotiate a better deal among ourselves and do that. Instead of that, you thought that you could just not do that, not tackle some issues head on. Once you set this kind of a move in process, it would be very difficult to reverse, because now everything comes out legitimately without necessarily bad mouthing anybody in particular. So those are the things. What South Africa did, we could have done. I mean, you can't. Now you have a situation where one side is completely against the government, another side has no option but to defend the government no matter what it does, right? So I think there are these certain long-term things they could have done, but they haven't.
Yeah, in fact, what do you make of this whole farm laws thingy also? I mean, I think the government could have, I mean, again, my view, not your. I think the government could have handled it better. think the messaging was all over the place. I mean, what do
Yeah.
you think?
Yeah. I mean, it is like that advice which that old lady is supposed to have given to Chandragupta Maurya, because he was attacking the core instead of attacking the periphery, right? When you attack a kingdom from the periphery, it's easier to deal with it, because if you attack the core, then the kingdom actually fights back. So, and when you start eating rice, that old lady was telling her son, don't put your hand in the middle. Start at the end and take a little bite from the hot meal at the end. Then you can slowly go to the center. So this is what the BJP should have done, whether on the farm laws or anything else. That is, start at the periphery. That is, first, for example, create the marketing structure whereby you establish the fact that you can actually get a better price by selling outside the mandis. Huh? I mean, you've done that with Amul, you've done that with many of the state milk cooperative federations, right? Nobody is actually buying or selling at MSP or anything in these things, but we are the world's biggest milk producer. People are very happy with the cooperative situation where an alternative. So establish the alternative before you make the law. Second thing is, this business, it became very easy to criticize the center because all the MSPs are done by the center, whereas agriculture is actually a state subject. So the states are
Absolutely.
happy to blame the center for everything. Whereas if you had said, I am going to devolve the entire MSP structure to the states, you guys buy whatever you want. For your food security system, I will only keep a small central buffer stock to help all states. If you had done that, then suddenly the states would have fallen apart, because they would, each of them will fight in their own interest. So they will say, Madhya Pradesh will say, look, I need this MSP for my crop because I'm an agricultural state. Whereas industrial state will say, look, I don't need it. I'll buy it at this rate from the market, right? So each guy would have got money to do his own thing, and before you know, the MSP would have been a fact of history, and farmers would have been better off. So you have to attack some things from the periphery, not the center. And that is where we are going wrong in reforms, except for 1991, where external bankruptcy enabled us to attack a problem at the center. In most other cases, when you are making big ticket reforms, start at the periphery, start making the actual changes on the ground. See, what is China doing on the border? It's trying to grab 5 square yards at a time, right? So that you don't think it's a big thing. And before you know, the buggers are 5 kilometers inside where you were, right? So this is where I think we need to understand how start the salami slicing of reforms and present the farmers with a fait accompli where they realize that they are losing something great by opposing a reform. Then bring the reform as the last thing, as a coup de grace.
So now, Jaggi, I also wanted to take a few questions from our live viewers.
Sure.
So maybe I'll start with this. So somebody has just said this is a general question. I guess they are subscribers. Most of them are about Swarajya, so, so it is what it is.
Okay.
So they said this is a general question. Did the readership of Swarajya fall after putting a paywall, or how? And also they want to know, how do we convince more people to pay for quality digital journalism?
Yeah, actually, see, this is a problem with all of media and not just Swarajya. The minute you put a paywall or the minute you have to pay for a product, automatically it restricts your circulation, because only subscribers get to see after a point, right? So it's a chicken or egg thing. I think, in fact, the internet model has been done by the newspapers long before the internet model came, where you try to make things free. A newspaper is essentially supplied to you free, because the 4 rupees or 5 rupees that you may pay for a newspaper is actually the cost less, one fourth of the cost of printing and production and distribution. So basically, they are just recovering a part of the delivery costs. They are not recovering actual costs. So same thing happens in this space. Unfortunately, if you want to be viable, you need to be based more on subscription and less on. Once upon a time, actually, advertising was a good source of revenue in digital. But today, I think Google and Facebook have conquered 80 to 90% of the advertising rupee. So you get only the crumbs that are left after that. And the cost of inventory is fallen so dramatically that you practically cannot get any value from advertising, so you have to depend on subscription, and that's the model that most people ultimately have to follow. It restricts your growth or slows it down, It doesn't restrict your readership. It does restrict the growth of the readership.
So, okay, someone has asked this question. I mean, I'm going to be as open and I'll read
Yeah,
it
yeah,
because
yeah,
these are, it's very interesting. These are all subscribers of Swarajya, by the way, so they
yeah,
care
yeah,
about Swarajya. So someone is like,
yeah.
in the West, political parties usually give better access to friendly media. Swarajya
Huh.
is conservative in its leaning, but the conservative government does not give you the type of access they give to Hindu Times of India. Where what is happening? Somebody has asked this
No,
question.
no, no, it's not entirely true. We do have access to quite a lot of people in government, but it's largely because they respect us for what we do. But I cannot deny the reality that most politicians who are in their 50s and 60s actually prefer to be featured in the traditional media. This could be TV or print, you know. So, and they're also trying to curry favor with this so-called secular crowd. huh? So it works well for them because that's where they want to be. Like, I mean, if you see anybody in the government, if a Time magazine or let's say even the New York Times want to interview them, they'll spread the red carpet. Right. So, because I think it's part of the colonial mindset also. We think if a foreigner says something about us, it's more important than what we say about ourselves. The second thing is uh, most what I would call businessmen actually prefer to invest in left wing media for a simple reason because it is the left that they are afraid of in terms of political attacks. So it makes sense for them to invest in left wing or liberal media because it gives them protection. You ask yourself who are the big investors in NDTV or Tarun Tejpal's thing, and you will find they are all big businessmen who are putting money there. You know, why did they do so when these fellows are actually in a different political category, right? You will never find big business investing in Swarajya because they know that we are not anti-business. So they say, look, why should I pay you money in order to say what we anyway know you will do? Huh? So they prefer to get protection from the guys who will attack them rather than the guys who may give them a fair chance and who believe that they deserve a fair to be heard. So it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
But then I have to ask you a follow up then isn't this such a terrible situation where then your literal existence is based on your nuisance value? But if your
Yeah.
existence is based on your nuisance value, where does the truth lie in all of this then?
Yeah, exactly. So, in fact, if you see the business models of a lot of the regional dailies and even some of the smaller marginal publications, and for that matter, TV channels, comes from their ability to blackmail. So, like for example, I remember in one of the publications where I was working long back, suddenly I found one of the directors come and say, "Look, why didn't you attack this guy? This guy is not giving us ads." Huh? Okay, now I found that very painful, and I said, "Look, I can't do all that, and you, I can't just do a hack job because he's not giving you a ad." But then they found somebody else who could do that story and get it done. But the point is, like this was not when I was editor, but at a lower level, right? But they did not approach the editor. They approached me, and hoping that I will do their job. So this is the problem. In fact, all the regional dailies, which usually have some political connection. In fact, 31% of media is directly politically exposed, either owned by politically exposed persons or politicians or their relatives. So these people get their revenues from blackmail ability. Hmm. So if they say I will do this story against this businessman or this politicians, then they'll get advertising. That's how the advertising does not come because of your readership, but because of what you can threaten to do against a specific politician or businessman. That's what happens.
uh, it's terrible. So Jaggi, one last
Yeah.
question, because obviously it's very funny, even I am in the digital space, so I mean that
Yeah.
I'm asking this question is, I think and maybe I'll explain to you where I come from, and I'll tell you why I'm asking you, because I find Swarajya not doing it, and
Uh,
probably Swarajya being one of the few ones that doesn't do it in the print space, at least on online. So I mean, I'm not making a judgment call, but I have consciously avoided doing clickbait on at least my
Yeah.
channel, on my
Yeah.
podcast. Anybody who comes here, I'll get funny emails like, "Arey Kushal bhaiya, you should use this tag. You should do that." I was like, "Yaar, मेरे को कितना बेवकूफ समझते हो? How stupid do you think I am that I would not understand that if something is trending on social media, all I do is I create a YouTube discussion on that, and I'll get thousands and thousands and maybe and sometimes lakhs of views. I'm not that
Yeah.
stupid. I have an ethical issue with it. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And so something that I've always loved about Swarajya is that they literally look at issues holistically. And I don't say this to make you happy. I genuinely, this is why I have Swarajya. I'm a subscriber because I like that. But we cannot escape the fact, Jaggi, that the digital space is completely clickbait driven. Do you see any future of a non-clickbait world?
No, which is why I think subscriptions work on that basis. That is why if people are willing to pay money for you to read, then you don't have to deliver clickbait things. But I will say one thing, that we do have 5 or 10% of say day-to-day news things which do serve as some clickbait. So if something happens in some area, there is a short news curation which may have an element of clickbait there. But generally, we don't do those stories on our own. I mean, we do just do a summary of the stories we found in some other media reporting it. We curate it and put it there just to keep abreast of the day's news. But 90% we don't do that. Huh? But I can't say that we don't do it 5% of the time, because there is some amount of daily traction that we need even in order to get people to subscribe. So you have to first get them there
Fair enough.
and then say there is this great content here, so you guys, maybe you got drawn in for the wrong reasons, but you can stay for the right reasons.
So, Jaggi, before we wrap today's discussion up, maybe I'll do this. So, if I was a young kid, I come up, I have seen major journalists, doing this. So, what would your so this is my last question today. So, what is your advice to young kids who just want to learn about their society, their country? How should they go about consuming news as per your experience of which spans more than 4 decades?
So my suggestion is to always read not just what you like reading or what you think you believe in, but read some of the stuff that you don't believe in. Then that will give you a good perspective. The second thing is spend more time reading books than just headline. In fact, spend more time listening to podcasts, I would say, or for that matter, things, because for the simple reasons, if you want to go deep into a subject, a podcast or a straightforward, deep dive into, or even a debate for that matter, between two people who have different points of view, they actually give you depth and understanding that you will never get from a TV program or even a newspaper for that matter, because the newspaper is limited by space, and you may serendipitously come into a particular story that you like, but they cannot ever go into it at sufficient depth. Where if you really want to understand an issue, you have to be in a digital space, because I can write a 3,000 word copy on an issue, trying to deal with as many. If I were to write the same thing in a Times of India or somewhere else, I'll have to restrict myself to 800, 850 words, which means I can have to be cryptic in terms of explaining what I'm trying to say, right? Or I'll explain only one aspect of it, and I'm not, since I'm not running a serial there, I can't explain all aspects of a story in this thing. So my advice, I think you will get more knowledge from books and various YouTube channels, including, I'm sure, yours, which actually give you greater depth, and of course digital publications of all kinds, because there is no limitation on space. Anybody who wants to know more can get more. So that is where I think true learning happens, because of the depth with which you're able to go. If you're only interested in the survey, anyway, you can read something like in shorts or something, you'll get out the headlines. It's not a problem. But if you really want to understand an issue, you must do this.
Great. Jaggi, I have been reading you for such a long time. So first of all, I want to end today's podcast by once again thanking you for coming. I have deep admiration for you and your work. And I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you once again, because people like you, the way you write, the way you present your points. I mean, at least a guy like me has learned a lot by reading you. So once again, thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you, Kushal. And I hope your program goes from strength to strength, your podcast, because I find it very meaningful. Because if people want to understand issues, you need to know what all people are thinking rather than just get the headline or clickbait. You are more than that, and that's good for us.
Thank you very much. It means a lot to me coming from you. So, guys, once again, before we wrap today's discussion up, I have been a subscriber of Swarajya for a long, long time. I always renew my subscription because I love what they're doing over there. I would request each and every one of you, whosoever is going to listen to this, doesn't matter if you're listening to this on YouTube or you're going to be listening to this on the audio platforms, whether iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever, go and subscribe to Swarajya. Also, you can go on Amazon and maybe buy Jaggi's book, The Jobs Crisis in India. It was a wonderful book. You'll learn a lot. If you have any questions, you can always go on social media. You can maybe ask him a question over there. And if you like what I'm doing on the podcast, please subscribe to the channel. Or if you're on the audio platform, subscribe over there. You can leave a review on iTunes. Apparently, that helps the rating of the podcast. I don't understand half the things that happen in the digital space. That's how illiterate I am. Uh, and if you want to go to the next step, like Jaggi said, the subscription model is the only model where you can protect the truth. So if you want me to remain the way I am, so you can become a member on YouTube, or you can become a Patreon on a supporter on Patreon, or you can buy the merch or send your donations through UPI. I'll see you guys next time with another interesting conversation. Until then, namaste, take care, goodbye.